This balloon carries a passenger beginning a journey that will tell us more about animal navigation. Ken Abel from the University of Albany in New York State studies navigation in white-throated sparrows. These birds fly south to winter in New York and return north to Canada in the spring. They migrate at night, always setting off at dusk. Ken's trying to find out how the birds determine their direction of flight. The method he uses to launch the birds may seem elaborate, but each component has a purpose. The bird will be carried aloft in a white box that's fastened shut by a potassium nitrate fuse. Attached to the box is a metallic foil ball, a good reflector of microwave radiation, that provides a strong target for locating the whole setup on radar.
Just hold that right down near the tip. Hold that if you would.
The weather balloon is filled with helium and carries the bird high enough to give it a good takeoff.
Okay, now let that up gently. Just let the string right up.
He attaches a chemical light so that the balloon can be seen from the ground. An observer can then give directions on its position as Ken searches for the radar signal. Once the fuse has been lit, he has just a few minutes to locate the position of the boxed bird before the fuse burns through and the bird is set free.
Where is it? Left. Up a little more. Up. Up a little left. No, right now, right. Don't see it. Okay, there.
Yeah, I
Get
see
it? Got it?
The opening of the box caused the light and foil ball to drop off, but they're no longer required, as now he's locked on to the weak radar signal of the bird itself. Now the radar is switched on to automatic track. It follows the bird, giving constant output of the bird's altitude, flight speed, and direction. A computer records the data for later analysis.
What we're doing in this experiment is radar tracking night migrants under natural free flight conditions. What we want to do is to be able to track the birds under various conditions of overcast and clear skies, winds blowing in various directions, so that we can ask what cues the birds are using and what are the relationships among those cues as the bird chooses its migratory direction. Basically, we have released birds treated in one of two ways. One group were white-throated sparrows, untreated in any way, with perfectly normal vision, released after it is completely dark, so there's no sunset glow. When the birds come out of the box, they're able to see the stars. It's a clear night, but the wind is blowing in an inappropriate direction, a wrong direction for migration at that season. These normal birds, control birds, fly off in the appropriate seasonal direction when they come out of the box. The other sort of bird that we've released is, again, a white-throated sparrow, but in this case fitted with small frosted contact lenses which preclude the bird from seeing the stars when it comes out of the box. These birds are released alternately with those that have no lenses. What we find is that the birds with the lenses tend to orient and fly off in the downwind direction when they come out of the box. Unable to see the stars, they seem to use the wind direction as their primary orientation cue. And since we have selected nights on which the wind is blowing in an inappropriate direction for migration at that season, they fly off in a direction that is more or less opposite to that of the direction chosen by the birds that are not wearing lenses.
So, temporarily depriving birds of seeing sunset and stars prevents them finding the correct migratory direction. Either of these visual cues can provide birds with compass information. But they're not the only possible references. Another could be the way light polarizes in the dusk sky. To find out if polarized light does influence the flight direction of the birds, Ken sets up another experiment in the middle of a cornfield where there's a clear view of the sky. He uses orientation cages. These are paper funnels used to record the footprints of birds placed in them as they attempt to fly off. An inky pad will help reveal the evidence. To find the exact orientation of the polarized light in the sky, Ken takes a precise compass bearing on the setting sun.
In the natural sky at sunset, the axis of skylight polarization directly overhead would be aligned north to south. Polarized light presents an axis. An organism cannot tell one end of that axis from another. That is, if one is presented polarized light oriented north-south, there is no way to know from that information alone which is the north end and which is the south end. This is a Polaroid filter which allows polarized light that is polarized in this axis to pass through. Light that is polarized along this axis is differentially filtered out. Since the sun is setting in the west, the sky is polarized in this direction directly overhead at this time, at sunset. If we turn the filter this way, we filter out that polarized light from overhead because its axis of polarization is now this way, which is the direction that the filter removes. So the sky gets lighter and then it gets darker as we either remove or allow to pass through the polarized skylight from overhead. In order to do the experiment, we align these filters in two ways with respect to where the sun has set. We have one set of filters aligned in one direction, the other set aligned at right angles to the first. So we present the bird with an unnatural relationship between the axis of polarization that they see from inside the cage and the position of the sun itself, thereby allowing us to tease apart whether the bird is paying more attention to the sun itself or where the sun has set, or the polarization patterns in the sky. The birds are placed in the funnels and allowed to hop in there between the time the sun has set and the time the first stars become visible. This is one of the beauties of an orientation cage. It allows one to manipulate the information that a bird is able to perceive at the time it's making decisions about orientation. The birds can tell where the sun is set because there's still a bright glow in the western sky, but they nonetheless orient their hopping consistently parallel to the polarized light cue, implying that, at least in this situation, polarized light information seems to be dominant to the sunset position itself. What I'm trying to do now is devise a new technique which combines the virtues of the orientation cage in terms of its experimental flexibility and the balloon release technique in terms of its more natural aspects.
The bird is tethered in an orientation cage without a top. Attached to its tail is a small chemical light. The tether passes down through the table. It's long enough to allow the bird to hop and leave its footprints behind as before, but in this case, when a bird seems ready to fly, the tether is quietly cut loose. With the help of an image intensifier, Ken is able to follow the bird's flight path.
So what I hope to be able to do with this release cage technique is to compare directly what the bird did in the cage with what it does when it flies out of there. Are those directions the same? It would be very encouraging to find out that they were. Another source of compass information that birds might use is the Earth's magnetic field. There is good experimental evidence that a number of kinds of animals possess a magnetic compass. And yet in radar tracking and other observations of free-flying birds, one sees no effect of this potential magnetic compass. For example, the birds wearing frosted lenses flew off in an inappropriate downwind direction when one might have predicted that they could consult their magnetic compass and determine a correct direction in which to fly. On the other hand, when one sets up an orientation cage experiment in a set of magnetic coils which allow you to manipulate the Earth's magnetic field, you do get magnetic effects on the orientation of the birds. What this may mean is that birds cannot or do not consult their magnetic compass during free flight or when dropped out of a box. Perhaps it's only something that they can refer to when they're sitting on the ground. There is also some evidence that birds, at least some species of birds, don't consult their magnetic compass on a daily basis, but only every 2 or 3 days, meaning that detecting those sorts of effects experimentally is rather difficult. So we have a whole array of compass or directional information that migratory birds seem to use. The sun itself, polarized light, the stars, wind direction, the Earth's magnetic field. And our problem is in trying to figure out how those pieces of information are related to one another, whether in a hierarchical way or whether the birds integrate information from all of those compass systems simultaneously.
Other animals, besides birds, navigate. Newts find their way back to their home pond each spring after hibernating on the land. It's no distance in terms of bird migration, but for a small animal, it's quite a trek. During their aquatic phase, they also need to find their way between their home shore and the pond, and so must use some kind of compass information. Craig Adler of Cornell University has been trying to unravel their orientation behavior.
Get the bottom of the net down there. Yes. I see many of them are mating. They're not paying attention to us. How many? We've got maybe 15 or 20 in there now. Wiggle it along there. Yeah, right. Let's bring the group up and out. Oh. Great. Now let's bring them up on the shore.
Newts collected from one side of a pond and released on the same shore easily find their way back to the pond. But how reliable is their sense of direction if they're released on the opposite bank?
Stick these over on the opposite shore. Right about in here. Chris is opposite the other shore. Let me spread this out. Now, let's put the newts down on this and see what direction they move. One would think that they might move in the pondward direction toward familiar odors and landmarks. Looks as if most of them are moving in an eastward direction, which is exactly opposite to the direction of the pond at this site. Our interpretation is that these animals are showing a simple compass orientation behavior, in the sense that were they on their home shore, they would have to move in an eastward direction in order to get back to the water. We can test this idea by moving some miles away to a forested area where there are no familiar landmarks or odors for them to use.
Two groups of newts have been collected from our pond. One group from the south bank, marked with red waistbands, and the other from the north bank with blue bands. If these aquatic newts show a similar response to the ones we released at the pond, then we'd expect them to move in the opposite direction to their home bank as they search for the water. So the reds would move north and the blues would move south.
There are two sorts of responses that we might expect from these newts. On the one hand, they might move in the direction of their home pond, which from this site is due west. On the other hand, they may sort out according to shore-specific cues. In that case, we would expect the animals we caught on the south shore to move north to the direction where you see the red flags. The other group, which we collected on the north shore, would be expected to move to the south into these cans that are labeled with blue flags. So let's take a look and see where the animals have turned up. So if we look over in these cans, here are two blue animals in that can. There are two more in this can. See about three in here. Let's look over in the west, which would be the direction of the home pond. I see two reds and a blue in there. And now let's see over here where we'd expect the red animals. There's several red animals in each of these cans. So the kind of response that we've seen in this test is typical of what we've seen many times in a level arena like this. The animals move according to the shores from which they were collected, shore-specific responses, rather than homing behavior. The question then is, what kinds of cues are they using to guide their movements? Because we're several miles away from the home pond in which we collected them. They might use landmarks, some salamanders do, yet these landmarks are unfamiliar to the newts that we've released here. They could use odors, but the odors here are also unfamiliar, and we know that the results are very much the same regardless of the wind direction. They might also use celestial cues, including polarized light, but we get the same kinds of responses even on overcast days where there are no celestial cues available. So it leads us to believe that there must be some other cue that they can also potentially use. And the thought of magnetic cues being that other cue has occurred to us, but in order to answer that sort of question, we have to go into the more controlled environment of the laboratory.
It's possible to train newts to follow different geometric axes by keeping them in tanks that are oriented in a particular direction. Newts trained, for example, on a north-south or east-west axis can then be tested for their sensitivity to changes in magnetic field. Here's Craig's colleague, John Phillips.
This is where we test the newts for magnetic field sensitivity. The apparatus is fairly complicated, but consists basically of a test arena, which is a vertical cylinder which encloses a horizontal surface on which the newts walk. This arena is positioned inside a series of coils, which allow us to change the direction of magnetic north. When current is passed through the coils, it produces an artificial field which sums with the natural magnetic field of the Earth to produce a new direction. First, we use magnetic north in north, which is the natural magnetic field of the Earth. Then we use magnetic north in east, in south, and in west. We test one animal in each of the 4 magnetic field conditions before we repeat the sequence. After a short delay, I use this hydraulic mechanism to raise the release device. This allows the newt free access to the arena surface. We watch the newt's directional movements by means of its silhouette, which is reflected in a mirror located beneath the arena. This prevents us from biasing the newt's directional response. When the newt reaches the side of the arena, we score its directional response with respect to the grid on the arena surface. These types of tests have shown us that newts clearly have a very good magnetic compass. They exhibit strong and consistent magnetic compass orientation in the direction of the shoreline in their artificial tank. The strength of this response is much greater than has been found in any other vertebrate under laboratory conditions. However, our most intriguing result was found quite by accident. In the spring of the year, the newts switched from orienting in the compass direction of the shoreline to orienting in the direction of the home pond in which they were collected. The reason that this result is so interesting is that compass information alone is not adequate to allow a newt to determine the homeward direction. That newt needs some map or compass information to know its position relative to the home pond.
So we know that newts have a compass sense, but a compass sense alone is insufficient unless they know where on the map they are in order to use that compass information to find their way back to their home pond. And therefore it's believed that organisms like newts and others which can navigate do so in a 2-step manner. First, they have to determine their position, the so-called map step, followed up by the compass step, the use of the compass information in order to move back to the home pond. Now we know a great deal about how organisms obtain and use compass information, but we know very little about what is the map sense for newts or any other organism. What are the kinds of cues that they might use to determine their position on the surface of the Earth? One possibility is, of course, the Earth's magnetic field, which varies from place to place in a grid-like manner, but the differences from place to place are extremely tiny, and an organism would have to have extreme sensitivity to magnetic field changes in order to use a magnetic map. Now we know that our newts during the migratory season in fact are extremely sensitive to magnetic field changes, and possibly they can use the magnetic information both as a compass and a map. Another possibility is that organisms might keep track of their movements as they're moving along in the forest or in the fields or during displacements in an actual experiment. And then by keeping track of this movement with respect to magnetic cues or some other, upon release or when motivated to move back to the pond, they simply retrace their steps. Now we can get at that last question by taking a coil from the laboratory, putting it on a portable stretcher, and transporting newts in an altered magnetic field in which the magnetic field has been twisted, and then testing them in an arena to see whether or not their sense of movement has been twisted. And what we find is that there's no difference. Apparently, the twisted magnetic field has no effect on the animals. And so what we're led to believe is that what is important is that the animals read the magnetic map, so to speak, at the time they're motivated to move back to the home pond. So we know that newts can use magnetic cues as well as others, and many other organisms apparently also use magnetic cues. But how these cues are integrated and which cues in fact are used by other organisms, this is the area in which we expect research to go over the next several years.